really the most traumatic experiences that human beings can face. And people are calling me with crises, and they're just presenting them because I invite them. And what I find is that what I offer them is, first, my heart is breaking for their pain. And I would take it if I could, but I can't. But what I am is somebody that at the same moment as my heart hurts, I have a very, very deep appreciation of the lawful nature of things, and that is at some other level, not the human personality level, at another level, it is at a spiritual level, that is the curriculum that that person needs to have. It is optimum for them. And it's not Pollyanna-ish. I can feel it is rooted in an absolute depth of understanding of Dharma, for me. I mean, as deep as I've been able to get. A sense of the rightness of people's life experiences, even as traumatic as they might be. And that is so deeply imbued in me now that I am able to be with somebody that's suffering, and they feel that my heart hurts because I'm a human with them, and at the same moment there is an equanimity in me, and often that rubs off, and they begin to relax a little bit because they begin to get a sense that there is another way of being with what's happening to them, in a way that doesn't have to keep them doing themselves in all the time. And it is an incredible gift to be able to offer another human being. The gift of equanimity in the presence of trauma. The gift of a faith. It's faith, really. It's not beliefs, it's faith. It's a very deep faith in the unfolding of the law of the universe. And what I do is I put myself in these situations, and I'm constantly watching that balance inside myself. I'm very aware when some new one comes along and my heart gets so engaged that I feel I'm losing my clarity. See, if you come down too much into the heart, it breaks. It breaks again and again, but I mean, it gets muddy. It gets muddy because you want so to take away their suffering, and you're busy judging God. You're saying, you really screwed up giving this person suffering. And yet if you get too far into the other place, it's so cold. It's so impersonal. It's like somebody falls down, you say, karma. I mean, it doesn't have the human heart in it. And it's that balance of the heart and that higher wisdom, the human heart and the deeper heart is really the way I'd call it. That balance is where the saving grace is. Not to deny your humanity and not to deny your divinity. And that's what you and I are here about. We are here for these 10 days to find that balance. We all know our humanity all too well. And that's why we put the focus on recognizing that part of us that isn't in the humanness, not to deny the humanity, but to bring a balance about. Because that's what you offer another person. When I look at Kelly, I see a soul that has taken an incarnation that has a curriculum. And when I look at some of you, and I know you have problems with addiction and problems with sexual obsessions and problems with loneliness and problems with anger and problems with diseases and problems with frigidity and tightness, and I look and I see the whole sea of stuff, or you tell me about it. And I just see curriculum after curriculum after curriculum after curriculum, and I just see a group of beautiful souls on earth, each having its own karmic work to do. And at the same moment, when you present it to me, my heart hurts. You don't protect your heart from breaking. Because in a way, a broken heart is like cracking the shell to let the deeper heart come forth. Because compassion is, it's like the monk who's crying because his son has died, and the student comes up and says, "What are you crying about? You know it's all illusion." And he says, "Yes, but the death of a son is the greatest illusion." And Maharaji crying when I was hurting. That you don't close off your humanity by any means, but you balance your humanity. And if you don't balance your humanity, you burn out. And if you don't balance your humanity, you armor your heart. And if you armor your heart, you starve to death. And that's why you burn out, because you're not getting fed. Because you've got to avert your eyes from the suffering of the world. You can't look at the have-nots in the world. You can't stand it. You've got to look away all the time. You've got to avert your eyes from Central America and from India and from all those places, because you just can't stand it, because you feel so impotent to do something to take away the suffering. We're going to talk about healing and helping and all those things in a couple of days, so I'm not going to belabor that. I'm nearly stopping. I just want to say a couple more things. If you are going to be free, your freedom means that you do not avert your eyes from anything in yourself or in anybody else. Freedom means to be a free awareness in what is. No aversion, no attachment. They say that for a saint, all the world are their children. And you feel the suffering of another person the same way you would as if it were your child. It's almost unbearable. And what makes it bearable, there is a beautiful statue of the Buddha, and it has a little smile at the edge of its mouth, and it's called the smile of unbearable compassion. Sounds like a paradox. The smile of unbearable compassion. It's the unbearable compassion. It's beyond bearing. And if you were somebody, you couldn't bear it. But you are the universe, and that is what you are. You are all of that. And it's that balance of inside yourself. Smile of unbearable compassion. And that ability to embrace the suffering into yourself, to just keep taking it in and taking it in and look towards it instead of away from it, and look towards it and then take the way in which it reacts in you and keep doing that delicate balancing number to balance that you still feel the humanity and at the same moment you allow. You don't sit around judging God like Job, you know, like, what have you done to me? I'm a good guy. What are you doing this to me for? You don't apply your rational criteria to the universe, because the way karma works is not understandable by your rational mind, since your rational mind is a product of karma. And a system cannot understand something that is meta to itself. It's a logical impossibility. So that you don't hear the full universe. And there's where the faith comes, and the faith is deepened through your own practices, through your own direct experiences. It's not beliefs that somebody hands you, it's faith that comes through your own direct experiences. So you learn to keep your heart open in hell, finally. Recently I took a chemical, it was like a 10-minute acid trip. Somebody had this new chemical and I said I would try it, and about 20 seconds after I took it, it came. I was in a very, right at the edge of the void, and then as I came back, I began to be aware of the universe and the nature of suffering, nature of what's called dukkha, or suffering. And I experienced an involuntary process going on in myself which sounded like retching. I was going, and the people who were around me were getting buckets and all that. And it was interesting because inside of me, I was in a state of bliss, first of all. And at the same moment, what I was experiencing was I was gorging on my consuming of the suffering into myself. It was like a mother embracing its children into itself, and it was like, it was the most primordial experience. It lasted about 3 minutes. But I recognized exactly how that was an image of just what was going on in my life. That if you're going to be free, you can't avert your gaze from anything. And you can't even avert your gaze into pity, or avert your gaze into kindness, or into righteousness. They deserve to suffer. can't avert your gaze at all. You've just got to sit with the bare facts of the phenomena of what's going on. And when you look into the eyes of somebody that has done a lot of that work, their eyes look dead, almost burned out, empty, but very, very deep and kind of timeless and just present. You watch the eyes, like Ramana Maharshi's eyes, the eyes like that, Ananda Maya's eyes. You look into those eyes and you just see that they can look at it all. They're eyes that look at the universe as it is. And they don't have to dissemble in order to keep it together. That's what freedom is. Freedom isn't all ha ha ha, it's all. And yet, it has bliss. It has a credible quality of joy in it. And that's what was so staggering to me, that I was in bliss at the same moment this process of incorporating the suffering was going on into myself. It was the bliss of intimacy. It was the bliss of being with the beloved. It was the bliss of merging with the universe. It's the way you would take on the suffering of somebody you love if you could, in which you just become the whole organism, just all of it. It's all inside you. It's all inside you. And it's interesting when your mind starts to let go of your separateness, how when tomorrow, when you hear the statistics, like there is enough food in the world to go around and yet people are starving, you get a sense of our confusion as an organism, our confusion. That we got so frightened that the fear led to greed, and the greed led to separateness, and the separateness led to protecting the king of the mountain status, and that led to such suffering in other people, and that suffering in other people leads to terrorism and to violence, and that violence threatens the establishment more, and so the whole game goes on, and you see how what you have to do in yourself to become an instrument for the change of all that. Because physician, heal thyself. That if you would have the world peaceful, you better be peaceful. And if you would have the world non-reactive to suffering other than to relieve it where it can, you have to really be that way in yourself. So you see what the agenda is. And the agenda is incredibly profound, and it starts with you. It starts inside. It starts with your own dealing with your own suffering. A 5-minute break, and then we're going to do a meditation in which we're just going to take a look at suffering a little bit. Not too heavy, but a little bit.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. We appreciate all the support for the foundation and for Ram Dass's work, and we hope that you will continue that support. You can go to ramdas.org and click on the Donate Now button and follow the prompts. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. Welcome to Ram Dass Here and Now, a new edition. I'm Raghu Marcus, your host for this program, for this podcast. Here we are. I'm sorry, folks. I actually missed a week or so, not much longer than that. And that's because I had to go to a convention. And the convention was of the Social Venture Network. And that is entrepreneurs who gather together to figure out how to properly use their energy and resources to advance social causes, do good social action. And Ram Dass has advised this organization in its earliest days, probably up till he had the stroke 15 years ago or so. And I went there to represent Love Serve Remember Foundation, see who's interested in supporting us, and see how we can support them. All of this being fairly new to me now, and it brought up a lot of my own back and forth, shall we say, about politics, spirituality, and social action. And this particular talk, actually, it's an interview Ram Dass gave that I found in 1979. It was July. And somehow they couldn't find where a studio or wherever this person was from. Her name is Dr. Patricia Hunt Perry. Never heard of her. Still don't know. Haven't asked Ram Dass who she is. But I was taken by, she asked some really great questions. And why I brought this social venture network thing up is that she asked Ram Dass specifically about the intersection of politics and spirituality in the 60s and 70s. And how did he feel, was there an intersection, and so on. And he basically talked about a real polarization between the spiritual community and the political community. That in the 60s, the whole acid and psychedelic thing and Haight-Ashbury was basically a spiritual movement. But that within that movement, there was political action going on. So he talked about that. It's really incisive stuff about this. It's a subject that's really come up, as we've gone through this election and so on and so forth, about how to take action and yet come from a spiritual base. Now, I myself, as I said about I had some trepidation going to this, social venture network gathering. I just feel like every time I've gone to, or been close to or involved with people who are really, wanting to change this world and grab it by the throat and change it, I've always had, misgivings about that. Now, maybe some of this is my own laziness about getting out there and getting on the streets. Well, it's not necessarily getting out on the streets, but that's part of it. So, there's some complexity involved here in terms of your, personality and so on. But I always did think that going out there and raging against the machine, to use a little quip for a band, it can't be productive unless you really are coming from a place where it's not us and them. And that is a very, very difficult thing. So, this has been a conundrum for me. And in this particular gathering of the Social Venture Network people, there was a lot of breakout groups that they had, and a lot of encountering and people sharing, which I thought was pretty marvelous. And it led me to have to be involved in a way that I don't normally involve myself with strangers. It turns out they weren't strangers. So that was a very positive thing. But, one of the things they asked was, what can you envision doing and seeing years down the road having an effect on culture and society, a positive effect? And being that I'm involved with, as a director of this foundation and involved with, what Ram Dass and what we have represented through our experience in India with Maharaji and so on, and the work that we've done, I said the only thing I know we can offer is to take inner action, take action that allows us to develop compassionate heart so that we are not seeing people as other, and that when we protest against that which they represent, which we feel is negative towards humans and our fellow humans. But if we can still hold that compassionate heart with them, then we can actually see real change happen. And that made me, again, think harder about some of personally, what I have done, where I have shied away from taking social action because of feeling like, those people are just, they're yelling for peace in a way that's like, oh, I want to kill you and get peace, So I've always, shied away from that kind of thing. But as I was saying this stuff, and that happens a lot, you start to express yourself and you realize certain things in yourself only through that expression, which is why some of this encounter stuff can be useful. But just started to realize I need to do more of that. I need to engender more of that compassionate heart. I need to stop hating, Paul Ryan. Okay? He's like very difficult. Ram Dass talks about putting people, he had Bush on his puja, on his altar, for, forever, just trying to reach the soul rather than be angry at the incarnation. So interesting stuff. I just wanted to quote, "The world is a reflection of the inner turmoil and confusion of an individual." So the talking about the polarization between spiritual and political people. "The world is a reflection of the inner turmoil and confusion that one has day to day, that you need to transform. You have to work on yourself first before you can work on the world." And I think that's a key point here. Political people become more conscious. The state of being is a part of political actions. So that has to be realized. Spiritual people need to honor your incarnation, our incarnation, accept your role. So I think those are two really key statements about what social action political people absolutely need to work on themselves. And spiritual people need to realize they're in the world and there is something to do, and you need to honor that particular role. And in talking about developing the spiritual people to take part in social action, you need to develop the compassionate heart. And even that, just then, understanding what compassion is. I mean, we all have ideas. A lot of it I have found in myself is like feeling bad for someone's plight. But compassion is beyond feeling just bad. And here in this particular description, which is a great one, of course, Ram Dass does synthesize stuff in a way that we can all understand. Development of compassion is a combination. It's a combination of human feelings, of being in the world, and feelings. That individual, you feel the pain, the suffering, the hope, and the joy, and the sadness wrapped up that we all have at one point or another. But at the same time, there's an equanimity of mind, seeing that it's all a dance and it's perfectly part of the universe, God, whatever you want to call its plan, law. It's part of the law. It's part of the unfolding. So you have that in mind as you are having this, complete empathetic feeling of what your neighbor is going through. So it's the balance. It's that balance where compassion lies. And I think that is so to the point. And that's what, we all need to work towards that balance. And, we all need to take part in what's going on around us, not just living in a cave and getting ourselves straight. Of course, that is entirely important. But I know in my own life, I have maybe shied away from taking any kind of social action or being involved. Also, I'm from Canada, which is a very apolitical place. Growing up, it just wasn't part of our lexicon whatsoever. But, I've lived here for a long time, and I notice I have shied away from some of this. So the universe has been dictating to me to be way more aware of the role and honor it, just being part of, here's where I am, and I am here, and there is a lot of injustice, and there is a lot of negative action going on, from the climate stuff to God knows what, huh? So, sorry to get a little too heavy with philosophic ramblings here, and rather some of you are going, enough already. Can we hear Ram Dass? So here he is, Ram Dass, here and now.
Be here in the middle of New York in the parking lot. Any space is good for you.
Great place for us to meet.
I've been thinking a lot lately about what's ahead for people on both a spiritual and perhaps a political level. William Irwin Thompson has talked a bit about the political level being one which needs to be addressed at this time, and he suggests that perhaps people in the 60s were operating on the political realm. In the 70s, we worked on ourselves in a consciousness kind of way, and that in the 80s, perhaps these two movements would come together. Do you see anything like this?
Well, I see something. I think I'd word it somewhat differently, and I would time label it differently, because certainly the 60s were the period of LSD and the Haight-Ashbury, and that wasn't political in large part. That was spiritual and consciousness. And there also was a lot of political activism. And that was a very fruitful, exciting, powerful time, the 60s, and we're still sort of reverberating from that. The problem that happened in the 60s was that it polarized between the spiritual and the political people. And that the political people felt, look, you can't go work on yourself when you're sitting in the middle of a mess that could explode any time. We've got to clean up the world first before we work on ourselves. And the spiritual people felt that the world is a reflection of the inner turmoil in people and the inner confusion, and you have to work on yourself first in order to work on the world. So that it polarized, and I remember having very sort of angry discussions with people like Jerry Rubin and Allen Ginsberg and people like that. Now here it is 10 years later, and we watch what happened to the Chicago 8 or 9, and we see that people like Rene Davis went with Guru Maharaji, and Allen Ginsberg is a student of Trungpa Rinpoche, and Dave Dillinger is a very spiritual guy in many ways, and Jerry Rubin has been through the Fisher-Hoffman method, and on and on. They began to realize that they had inner work to do, because they saw that if they protested against something in which they saw that which they were if they were attached to their anger, they kept creating the hell they were trying to get rid of all the time. And so it wasn't clear that they did incredible things. I mean, the end of the Vietnam War and Watergate and a lot of things have happened that are the result of incredible political activity. But at the same moment, there was a lot of paranoia and anger created as a result also. So that I think that the political people became more conscious that, just like scientists realize, an experimenter realizes that the experimenter is part of the experiment. So a political activist realizes that his being or her being is part of the political action. Well, the spiritual people had to come to another confrontation, because you began to see that if you wanted to be in God or get to God, you had to honor your incarnation, whatever that meant. Your incarnation meant you were an American, you were living in this age, in this time, in this culture, with this religion and this sex and so on. What did it mean to honor that? And a lot of us have started to try to assess what it means to honor incarnation. One of it means is to accept your role as a responsible member of a society and a world and an ecosystem and so on. So I, on the other hand, people like me, are now becoming much more politically responsible, And as in the same way, the political people become more spiritually. So recently, like last year, I was at Rocky Flats at a demonstration. And I went as a part of a group that Allen Ginsberg had created, in which we sat in meditation right in the middle of the demonstration, 40 of us with our zafus and then sitting and walking. The statement being that this statement is a quiet mind and an open heart is the way in which we can make our statement about how we can hear all the issues that are involved. And I sat there in meditation in the middle of this demonstration, listening to what's her name? Helen Caldecott? Is that her name? The Australian woman doctor? Beautiful gal. And all of the speakers. And I heard the use of a kind of emotional charged stuff, but it was different. There was a space of consciousness in the whole protest that was the result of the fact that it was slightly more conscious people doing the kind of protest. And that to me means that it can have much more power without having a boomerang effect. So that I really see the coming together as an incredibly positive possibility for more conscious social action in the society. In terms of whether it's enough or in time, or whether or not the culture is at a point of such chaos because of energy, ecology, lack of trust in government, a whole set of international strife, third world powers, nuclear possibility of nuclear destruction, proliferation, kind of fear, but when I read history, I see that time and time again people said the same thing about the period. You know, we'll never get through this period alive.
Very true.
And I approach life this way, that whatever the future holds, what I can do at this moment is to become as conscious and as compassionate and as present and as aware in this moment as I can be. I can live in this moment. And then if it's going to end in a day or in a billion years, that's the optimum strategy for me to perform. But being conscious in this moment means to be tuned to all the forces acting upon me at any moment. And that means my social, political responsibilities as well as my spiritual responsibilities.
I understand that when you were in England recently, there was some problem getting in, and it brought the political quite home to you, quite with an impact. Could you talk about that a little bit, and what was the lesson that you learned from that? Because obviously that's what each teaching is about.
Well, I learned a delicious lesson because I arrived at Heathrow Airport in London to be guest speaker for the World Symposium, and I went through the immigration, and I was down picking up my bag, and I felt a hand on my arm holding me tightly, and the man said, "Well, sir, you nearly got away from us." And I said, "I didn't know that I was trying." It turned out that since 1966 I'd been on the Home Secretary's list of it's called people who are non-conducive to the welfare of the United Kingdom, because of my connection to Tim Leary and drugs and so on. And so I was brought upstairs to the detention room, where for 10 hours, I guess, I was there with a group of delightful Pakistanis, Iranians, and Indians, all of whom were non-conducive to the welfare of the United Kingdom. And we had I couldn't have spent a more delightful day. And we were led to the bathroom with armed guards and taken in armed buses to cafeteria where the cook would open a locked window and hand out the food and lock it again in case we should leap through the window and attack her. And finally, at around 5 or 6 o'clock, they decided that I was really too bad to let in. And then they couldn't find an airline that would take me out of the country. I wanted to go to Amsterdam. Finally, they got Persian Gulf Airlines to take me. And they delivered me to the plane with armed guards, explaining to the stewardess that I was being deported. And all the people in the plane were watching me to wonder what kind of was I a sex maniac, or was it a bomber, a mad bomber? So I went to Amsterdam, but World Symposium had gotten on the case, and they got involved with a member of Parliament and the Home Secretary. And the next Tuesday, I was invited back in, met by a government official with a warm welcome, and he and I discussed the fact that people could change and that I was now really a good guy and that I loved England. So, first of all, one of the profound things that I noticed about myself and my changes was that I thoroughly delighted in the day, because I wasn't really attached to how my days come out, and finding myself in detention for a day when I was about to be received by a world symposium and it's treated like a crook all day was as interesting and delightful as it could have been the other way, which blew my mind that it could be that way. And the other thing is that I understand the predicament of governments, and I don't feel that they were doing anything other than protecting the people of their government, which is what they're supposed to do. If they let in people who are in any way destructive to the fabric of the culture, they're held responsible for that. And we have a very funny thing where we're caught between a tremendous paternalism we invest in our governments and then a tremendous demand for independence. And we're independent until something goes wrong, and then we want to blame the big daddy for doing wrong. And I think there's a very delicate balance. Every time I come to the United States, I'm searched, and I go through that. And I keep explaining to them I'm not that guy anymore. But the computer runs slowly, and I think you have to develop a sense of humor instead of making everything. If I'm going to fight issues, I'd rather fight more interesting issues.
It seems that that's very much like what you talked about in the first question, that not making a them and an us, not making confrontation. Is that what you're saying for the future, too, that we shouldn't make a distinction so that we can set up the people against us and have a confrontation?
It seems to me that the development of compassion, the concept of compassion, is some combination of human feelings and being in the world and feeling all the feelings of pity and pain and suffering and hope and joy and sadness, and also a kind of an equanimity of mind that comes from seeing that it's all kind of a dance and it's all quite perfect God's law unfolding. And it's that balance that's really where compassion lies. And with compassion, it seems to me, you develop an appreciation of what karmic predicament other beings are caught in. And you can see sort of why they are the way they are. And it is true that very often you, in order to fulfill your role as a citizen or as a human being, you have to act against another person's actions. You have to stop it or control it or protest against it. But the question is whether that other being is their action or is a being who is caught in a web of stuff of which the action is the result. And I constantly look and try to make contact because I identify with my own soul or spirit. That's what I see in other people. I mean, it really is, you see the projection of your own reality outside. So I just feel like I'm meeting a lot of souls that are each going through their own working out of stuff. Often their working out of stuff comes into conflict with mine. And we have to have a conflict. But I can play tennis with somebody we're collaborating to play tennis, but we are competing in the game of tennis. And we're living on two levels at once. And very often when I meet, say, a government official who has to search me or something, I see him as a human being who's earning a living, doing what he has to do. And he feels strange because I'm reacting to him that way. And he starts out from me being him, and he often ends up with me being us. And in that sense, I feel that my work in terms of sharing living consciousness, how do I know that my whole work on Earth wasn't to come and make contact with that one human being who was searching me? You know? So the game is much more multi-level than one would think.
The idea of searching you maybe in a new way.
Yeah.
The kind of search you may not realize either. You know, I was at the World Symposium on Humanity in Toronto in April, and I talked with Thomas Banyaka and some of the native people there. Thomas Banyaka is a Hopi elder. Mm-hmm. And they're very concerned about a coming chaos in the society and how we might begin to prepare ourselves for that, because they look at it as a time of purification, a time when the society has to go through a certain kind of chaos and disruption in order to get to the new level. Perhaps human beings sometimes have to do that too. Is that what our society is doing at this point, do you think?
I could write a dozen scenarios as to what's happening, and I know about the predictions of the Hopis. And that's a scenario. And there are a whole variety of different scenarios about what's happening. It could be, I'm inclined to understand that why we are on Earth, when Buddha talks about the hindrances that we work to overcome, of lust and greed, hatred and ill will, agitation, sloth and torpor, and doubt, and that unless you have these 5, you really aren't on Earth, because this is a training ground or an experiential ground to work with those things. So that if you were setting up a commune or a community, and you said, well, who will we put in it? Well, let's put in only people that have lust and greed, agitation, hatred, sloth or laziness, and doubt, you wouldn't be surprised to end up with what we've got now, okay? And in a way, that's what this is. It's a community self-selecting of people who have this kind of work to do, work with this stuff, all right? You hear what I'm saying? So under those conditions, it's hard to know what the tolerance is, how bad it can get before it blows up or it turns a cycle and gets better. I mean, I've watched cycles shift. I mean, I watched, like, before the Second World War. There was a certain kind of coldness in the society, and then the war came along, and in the midst of the war, there was a human quality brought out of the people, out of fear in part, but it brought them together. Marin County during the drought, New York during the first electricity out. By the second one, everybody was ready to rip off the stores, but the first one, that sometimes this crisis just cuts through a lot of the separateness of people and awakens, and it is a purification. You wouldn't lay it on the society, but you work with it. And how does any individual prepare for it? I think you prepare for it by getting free of feeling needful of a lot of things that might go in the shuffle when they hits the fan.
All those cars.
Well, a lot of things. I mean, I'm just writing a preface for a book by Dwayne Elgin on voluntary simplicity. And he's been a consultant of the government, and he worked at SRI for many years. And I'm fascinated with the fact that the reason I'm writing the preface is because as I've gone on and on with my own spiritual work, I've found myself yearning and living more and more simply all the time, and craving less and less of the things that we are, in view of the energy crunch and in view of ecology, and I'm going to have to give up anyway. So that you can lead people to, you can have simplicity out of imposing it by law, or you can have it out of awakening consciousness. If you awaken consciousness, people want less because they are more, and the moment is more, and they need less, because they're happier with the way things are, not keep modeling about how it ought to be, you know. So it feels to me like the people that have started to voluntarily simplify their lives are people that are in a better position psychologically to withstand the unexpected. I mean, like, if the gas crunch comes, I just won't go anywhere. And that'll be as interesting as going anywhere. I mean, there are other people who have a plan. I'm going somewhere, and if the energy crunch comes, they're destroyed. You hear that those distinctions?
Yes. Suppose we take a break for a moment, shall we? And
Okay.
then we're taping this. I mean, I don't feel that radio and television should be as perfect as they often try to be by redoing things. We're taping this in a car because we couldn't find any quiet place, and it's very, very warm. So we're going to take a break, and we'll listen to some music perhaps, and then we'll come back.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. We appreciate all the support for the Foundation and for Ram Dass's work, and we hope that you will continue that support. You can go to ramdas.org and click on the Donate Now button and follow the prompts. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. Welcome to Ram Dass Here and Now, and I'm Raghu Marcus. And happy to be back here. Another one of our broadcast radio show. This is going to be the second half of this thing that Ram Dass did. Now, it's from 1979, and it's with Dr. Patricia Hunt Perry. And the more I listen to it, and yes, I do, this is all brand new to me. Just like when you're first going to hear this, this is when I'm first hearing it and setting it up and making some comments and personal anecdotes around this material, which, although there's a variance of different subject matters here and different questions and so on, I kind of feel there's a link. At least I'm going to try and link them up together. So the initial topic was interesting, was about past lives and how past lives definitely play a role in any therapeutic setting with a therapist, that they have to be taken into account. And of course, that's all true. And just her suggestion was that taking the karmic point of view, if you want to call it that, is that a new way that therapy can ensue, where coming from that kind of consciousness. And Ram Dass's initial thing was that who you see, or who anybody sees as a person, depends, and then in a therapeutic setting, depends on who you think you are. But in any setting, anybody you meet, I mean, geez, every day I find, hopefully I have enough awareness, consciousness, that I can see when I'm stuck somewhere and caught in whatever it is, and I meet up with somebody, I'm just, that starts to be a projection reflection of where I'm at, whatever judgments I have about that person, or whatever reacting I'm doing with that person. So I think this goes a long way to really describe our everyday interactions with each other. It really do depend on where you think, who you think you are in any moment, and being as free as you are or as caught. Related to therapy, I thought this was interesting. The problem with most therapies is that they identify that person with the neurosis, with any sort of neurosis or psychosis. And if you identify someone with a neurosis, it invests the reality of that thing and makes it, much harder to get rid of. For those of us that have been in any kind of therapy, boy, is that something that's important. Because and that does happen. And I've certainly, even if you're, forget about big word therapy and psychiatrists and psychologists and all that. How many times have we all, sat with a friend, and who was in need and wanted some feedback, just that simple level. And, the more that you identify that person with what you think is their fall down in the situation, that certainly is going to obstruct any, the chance of becoming free of it. And so I think that's a wonderful, statement of that reality. They then talk about, institutions back then losing their legitimacy. Institutions today are losing legitimacy. I mean, look at the impossibility of our government to function through the supposed balance of power in Congress and so on, that nothing can get done. So Ram Dass talks about the reassertion of the human heart, and and talks about the Constitution reads to him as protecting the individual human heart. Not just gun rights. So, but moving through these things, I like to connect the historical thing. So, the cultural revolution, shall we say, of a sort, through psychedelics in the 60s, where we come from, to today. I mean, is there not so many parallels with the war, with the stressors that are going on? Certainly the stressors, high-end stressors, and the railing out against institutions back then, and what's going on now, and with some of the different movements that are happening in this country. So I think that the idea here that is being proposed from that time of around the reassertion of the individual human heart, the reassertion of our desire to develop our compassionate heart and share that. And that's what I like to take from that has been growing from that time to now. And I think that's, when you really think about it, a pretty amazing thing. The whole thing moves then into, this conversation moves into talk about media and technology and how that's used for the betterment of society, or is it not? And they're speaking then, of course, about the using mass media, obviously television in this case. But some of the things that are said are so applicable. And then I can see, what Ram Dass was talking about. For instance, media corrupts everything it touches, right? I mean, the truth is that he said he felt that technology allows people to move towards liberation at an incredible rate because they can run through fantasy of fantasy through media that is, a potential for releasing karmic stuff. So but then at the same time, he talks about his own inability at that time. He did a television show, apparently, which we'd like to find that for the archives. It's called Transformations, and it's a TV show from '79. They don't mention any, I'm going to try and ask him, but anybody knows that out there, a TV show that Ram Dass did. It was on early morning television in the New York area in '79. Let me know, because we want to get a hold of it. But he talks about how he turned down stuff like back then was Johnny Carson and Dick Cavett. He turned it down because he felt it was just not something that he could do honestly and have a real human exchange, because the kind of agenda that is there for television. And again, he reiterated, media can destroy the message by the way it delivers it. Now, he talks about how much his price is determines the message that he gives. But that's true of all of us. Now, if we take this one step further, interestingly enough, I think when we talk about where we're at with the web now, and how we're all communicating to each other so easily without any restraint, there is no restraint, like television is a restraint. But the essence here, and then he talks about, which is the most interesting thing, is how much, again, how much is his price? Because he has a price, wanting to be famous. Do we have a price? We want to be famous. We want to be more well-known. We want to be more well-liked. We want money. What do we want? But that determines the message that's given. And he says, if I'm on the make to become famous and powerful, then they got me, then isn't that true? So the capper of this is, not the capper, that's not the right word, but the interesting dissecting thought when he says he didn't do Carson, he didn't do Cavett back then, right? For more than one reason that we just discussed. But early this year, he did Oprah. Now, when this whole thing came up and I discussed it with him, he said to me, I think I can have, that there's a real human behind all of this Oprah-ness, and that I could have a conversation with her that would be two ways. There would be listening on both sides. And I said, well, I don't have any idea. I've heard from friends that have met her and everything, that she's sincere and so on. And he wanted to go forward. He was not, I think it was also because he didn't care. I mean, there was nothing, I mean, what at this point can he gain? I mean, his only interest these days, by the way, and one of the reasons this podcast is going on is to allow a new generation of people to find some of the wisdom in some of what he's done over the years and some of what he's doing now, like this Cultivating Loving Awareness film, which I talked about last week, which any of you who have not heard about that, by the way, go to the ramdas.org and you'll see the banner and the links and all that. So I think that in this case, he didn't have a price. He had nothing to lose. Because there wasn't anything in him that needed anything. And in the end, of course, when she came, for those of you who've seen that show, there is an incredible moment between them that it's actually, by the way, on our, what is it? I think it's on our Ram Dass official channel YouTube site. There's a few Oprah vignettes, and it's on one of them where you can see the moment they are completely present together. And that is a moment that he did not think he could get to back then. So interesting. And basically he says, a being that's free has no price. They're priceless. As long as I have a price, I am transmitting fear because I have something to lose. The minute I have no price, I can transmit perfect joy of presence and freedom. I think that his statement, obviously relative to him being a public figure back then and now, but in a different, I'm trying to think of this in a different light. And that's, we're all doing this by virtue of just being part of any social network. We are all doing, we are sharing ourselves. It could be a picture, it could be an article, it could be a thought. We are all doing this all the time now. And we are not constrained by any institution. I mean, that's, the freedom of the web is incredible that way. But wherever we do have some desire system going, that's beyond just the sharing, and you can see it in different aspects of the social networks where there is even the most mild come on, then you lose trust. And so I think this is a great thing for all of us, relating to many of the different points, that he talks about here, relate to us today. In a way, it's almost like this culture has been evolving in this way, to support the human heart expansion since that time. And I think more and more of us really want to share that. Well, here, listen to this lecture. It's not lecture. Listen to this wonderful back and forth with Ram Dass and Dr. Patricia Hunt Perry, and on Ram Dass Here and Now, and we will catch up with you next week. Namaste.
It's great. It's great. We're back, and we're a little bit cooler now. You were talking about people having karmic past and so forth. And one of the things that's been interesting me a lot lately is whether we should work with individuals in terms of past lives more, in helping them in what is traditionally called psychotherapy or whatever. Is there a whole new profession or group that needs to arise to work with the troubled individual in our society, perhaps, to look at it from a karmic point of view? Obviously, if you're treating a person who's 30 years old and he or she has had these 30 years, and you're trying to look at that lifespan and say, well, why is this person having this particular problem? And it comes from a past life, as you would indicate, you're not really doing anything.
Yeah.
So do we need to look at this in a different way, and do we need a new profession? What do we need to assist individuals?
Well, we're in traditional psychotherapy that tries to keep its link to the scientific community. We're a little bit like the drunk looking for his watch under the streetlight, and someone comes along and helps him, and they can't find the watch, and he says to the drunk, where did you lose it? And the drunk said, I lost it up in the alley. Well, why are you looking here? Because there's a light here. And in a way, what is measurable and noticeable is child experiences and so on, and sometimes heredity. But as a psychologist who did personality development research, I can say that at least when I left the field, even with multiple factor analytic techniques, the best predictive things you could get from all your environment and heredity of personality variables and pathology or neurosis and so on was perhaps of a correlation of maybe 50, which is about 1/4 of the variability in the whole thing. In other words, 3/4 of the way it's all coming out is still what's called chance, or a wastebasket category, which leaves ample space for reincarnation, for God, for chance. It's delightful. Right. So I don't think that we can systematically do something. What we can do is encourage people in the helping professions to not be as enamored of their models of cause and effect, and to just be a little more spacious about the whole business. And I think that it depends on who you see when somebody walks into your office. Do you see a client or a patient? Is it a man or a woman you see? Or do you see a fellow human being who is caught in a dilemma? Or do you see more of the play of God? Or a soul, like so many souls went down on the ship? I mean, who do you see when they walk in? Well, who you see depends on who you think you are. And the rule of thumb is if a therapist is busy thinking they're a therapist, then there's only room for a patient in the office, you know. While if a being is somebody who is working on themselves and their work is being a therapist, but their identity is that of being an awakening awareness, then they see another human being that same way. And the vehicle that brings two people together is therapy, perhaps. Like my first therapy patient turned me on to grass, okay, and did a great service for me, okay. Now, he helped me a lot, although I was his therapist. So, I don't know. He's ended up kind of neurotic, but I seem to be doing right. So, I don't know how you define the game anymore, really. That should lose a lot of listeners. I think that there is a place for psychotherapy, but I think that, like when I'm working with a fellow who's in a hospital in San Francisco, his parents called me from Kansas somewhere, said he had been hospitalized for violence and for attempting suicide. And he was very agitated and very manic. And he almost was unable to be talked to. They brought him to the phone, and he was screaming and yelling at me and telling me to, and labeling me, all kinds of things. And then I called the next night, and they said he was in chains. They couldn't get to him. And I said, just tell him I called, that's all. Then I called the next night. We got on the phone. He was on heavy tranquilizers, and he was soporific and kind of depressed. And this went on for about 7 days. Each day he told me he was going to commit suicide. I said, well, if you don't commit suicide, I'll speak to you tomorrow night. Okay? At the end of a week, I said to him, you know, What's interesting to me is that thus far, because of all the pills you're taking, your moods are going up and down, your personality variables are changing, but you still know I'm here, and I still know you're here, and there's some level at which you and I are here together, in just our awareness behind it all, you know? And I said, maybe that's the only contact you and I can make now, and I'm just holding your hand at the level of awareness, and you've got to do what you've got to do with that level of personality. And it feels to me that what I was doing was making contact with a place in him which has nothing to do with neurosis and psychosis. The problem with most therapies is that they identify that entity with the neurosis or the psychosis. And if you identify somebody with something, it invests the reality of that thing, and it makes it harder to get rid of. You understand what I'm saying? So that, to me, the question of who you see a person you are with, what role whether you cast them in their role or in their pathology or anything, determines how hard it is to get out of it. And so I think that the helping professions have a long way to go in getting rid of that kind of professional labeling that makes change almost impossible.
This whole idea of change keeps coming up in our culture. It seems to me that we're going through a period when perhaps the ground is almost changing underneath us. Again, to go back to Thompson, he talks about a time when the academic institutions took the legitimacy away from the old church institutions. What do you think is going to happen now to our institutions? Are we at a period in which they are losing legitimacy and we're turning again to the sacred, to the spiritual?
Well, I'd rather say it a slightly different way. I think that that the institutions are losing legitimacy, and I am delighted, because we have invested in the institutions and been willing to sacrifice the individual into the institution. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, we certainly have done that in large numbers. And if I were to see what the issue is, it's the reassertion of the human heart, of the individual heart. That more individuals, Proposition 13 was really individuals doing something at some point. I mean, institutional things then got created, but the original thing was, I've had enough, that kind of feeling. And I feel now that more people that what was called in this generation me-ism or narcissism, the self-growth movements and all that was put down by the society because it represented the breakdown. People were more interested in their own relationship to the universe than in being a good member of an institutional team. And I think that a mature, if I read the Constitution correctly, it seems to me that it is to protect the individual human heart, and that a lot has gotten lost in the shuffle. And that's what I see as the reassertion of something extremely healthy. When Mahatma Gandhi came out of meditation, when the Congress Party of India asked him to help get rid of the British, because he was the head of the party, and he meditated for 3 months, and he says, I've got it. And he led the march, the Satyagraha, he led the march to the ocean, went in and bathed, and came out, and there was a salt tax the British had imposed, and which meant that Indians had to pay a tax that took 2 weeks of their salary for salt they needed to survive, because it was so hot, as it is now. And he reached down and he picked up, it was illegal for an Indian to mine salt, and he reached down at the edge of the ocean and he picked up a handful of salt that had formed. By doing that, he broke the law. Here was one frail human being taking one human act and pitting it against the British government. And he won. A month later, 700,000 people had been put in jail for mining their own salt. And that was the beginning of the real critical point of breaking the back of the empire, which was the most powerful empire in the world at that moment. And later, when you saw that frail man walking barefoot into the Parliament, the British Parliament, in that huge institution, that monolithic structure, and here's this frail little man walking in, who one little man reaching down and picking up salt could do it. That's a statement about the individual in relation to the institution. To me, when I look in Washington at the White House and Congress and the FBI building and it looks like a movie set, like facades to me. I mean, it doesn't do the thing to me it's supposed to do. It's supposed to give me a feeling of reverence and awe,
Or at least fear.
Or at least fear, yes.
Good. Let's take another break for a moment. It seems to me, Ram Dass, that lately a number of people who are interested in spiritual things have become interested in television. I know that I saw a thing that you did not too long ago on a program called Transformations, which unfortunately was on very early in the morning, and perhaps people didn't see it. But at that time, you seemed to be making more than just a regular statement. You seemed to me to be making a statement about how we could use something in the future, like media, and particularly like television in that case, in a different way. Could you talk a bit about that, and do you see that as a possibility in the kind of opening that we're talking about in the society?
I've been fascinated with the ways in which I've been wrong in life. And
we are.
But I like to do it publicly because it's more fun that way. And, for example, in 1947, I was very active in the movement to get peacetime use of nuclear energy, because that was going to free us from hunger and from want, right? Yeah, I don't know whether you remember, somebody here remembers that time. And so in a way, the karma of what's happened is as much on me as anyone else, because I did it out of the best intentions, but I was wrong, all right? The cost was too high. We didn't have enough foresight and wisdom to assess the cost of it. We thought it was going to be free. We were going to get it free, home free, and have free energy forever. And well, I did a similar thing with television. I saw television as the worst menace, as a psychologist, as the worst menace to mankind, humankind. I now see the situation very differently. I now see that television, which is just like LSD comes out of technology, that it's an aspect of technology that is moving people towards liberation at an incredible rate, which is bizarre. Because the average American home person now looks 4.5, 5 hours a day at television. And I've thought about, like a kid at 12 years old, how many adult roles they vicariously live through. And I realize now that the media is taking them through fantasy after fantasy after fantasy, burning out stuff that might have taken lifetimes. I mean, it's a lifetime runner. It's running them through incarnations almost, vicariously. So, but it also appears to me that in the past, like Christ walks a few miles among a few villages and spreads the word among a few dozen, few hundred, few thousand people mainly. The power of his statement, the purity of his statement, and the timing of it moves out and out and out, and it's still, the waves, and it's like a pebble, dropping a pebble into a pool. It's still resonating back and forth out in infinity, Now, Buddha walks around to the deer park and walks and does a little teaching for 40 years, one guy, and it's still Buddhism. Half the world is Buddhist, I mean, it's still an incredible thing. Now we have this incredible instrument, technology, for sharing being with one another. But the problem is that very few people are pure enough to have anything to say that can liberate anybody else. That's what I'm aware of, that the media is sitting there waiting for consciousness, but there isn't any consciousness. I mean, what a Christ could have done, like what the new Pope is doing with the media is awesome. He is a jewel, by the way, a spiritual jewel in my book. All right, I am very awed by the new Pope because I watched his Easter message in London on television from the Vatican Square, and I felt the living spirit of Christ. Right, and that was, you see, and there was television, and he was saying sort of happy Easter and good peace in 40 different languages, or 45 different languages to all the peoples of the world, and they were all listening. And he was saying it, and he was saying it from a living spirit place in his being. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And I realize now that media is just waiting for the purity to make the contact, because if people like I was talking to the guys at the studio, and I was saying to them, I want to look right into the eye of the camera and meet the eye of the person that's looking, and all I have to do is not get caught in the camera that I'm seeing, and realize I'm looking into the eye and the heart and the soul of another human being, and talk directly to that human being and forget the camera. But I said, I'm afraid the looking into the camera thing has been all used up, because now everybody looks into the eye of the camera. See, and they showed me those cameras where they have the words of the news thing, or the cue card, right on the front where the lens is. I mean, even that, and they're using mirrors to get to the lens. It blows my mind. So it's not even they're looking down or looking up. But I said the difference is the focal length. The eye is focusing on those words. I'm looking into that place, right? And I'm looking with my heart, not just with my eyes. And I realize now that what happened was, many years ago, there was a fellow by the name of Lomax. He was an interviewer in Los Angeles. He was a black interviewer on a television station, and he interviewed me. And I was told specifically, you look at the interviewer, don't look at the camera. But I turned and I looked into the eye of the camera, and I talked to the people through the camera. And that week, he got something like 200 letters saying, who was that guy on the show? It felt like he was inside the middle of my head. See, now you say, oh my God, we're going to have a new power trip and everybody's going to be... And people indeed would if they could. But if their motivation is power, our society is so sophisticated now in sensing, in the paranoia of sensing the hustle, that what I'm saying is when there is somebody that isn't hustling, like I'm not trying to sell anybody anything. I'm not trying to get you to buy my magazine about how to get to God. I'm not trying to get you to declare yourself for any religion. I'm not doing it. There's no hustle. There's nothing I'm going to collect from that. So I can afford to be just what I am. And it may well be that that kind of straightness, which I'm not straight enough yet, so that when I come into the presence of this media, this huge media thing in which the minds of everybody is fixed a certain way, I don't cower a bit, right? I still have to realize, like I remember once I was sitting with Maharaji, my guru. He's got a blanket, he's sitting on a table, he's got miracles coming out of his toes. He can walk through walls, he can get people elected prime ministers, he can do it all without even leaving his table. He can do it with a thought form. And he's looking, and Indira Gandhi goes by with jeeps and limousines and tanks and all, and he looks at that and he says, look at all that, and it's just a worldly king. Okay? And I could see that from the point of it, like he said to me, I hear you're going to Mars. Meaning you Westerners going to Mars. I said, yeah, and he giggled. He thought that was the funniest thing. Well, that giggle is so free of the values when we say you're going to Mars. You know, you're going to Mars? Far out, you know. Do you hear that? Right. And in a way, it's going to take that kind of consciousness that's free of those cultural values for that thing to really happen.
So it really comes back to the same thing that we've been talking about before. It takes working on ourselves or developing people who will be able to do this from a conscious place rather than talking about the terrible aspects of technology, but really developing people. How do we go about that? I mean, we've talked about the 70s being a time when people started to do that. Are we developing a group of people who could do that in a conscious way and not, distort?
Well, I think that those people are developing. Most of those people that are becoming conscious enough so that they would actually be able to transmit a straight message on television wouldn't have anything to do with the media at the moment. They're hidden away and they're just doing their work because the media just corrupts everything it touches at this point that way. However, as the media starts to, it can't develop them, but as it starts to give space to them, which is through public broadcasting, through cable TV, just through having used up all their other stuff, they start to be interested, and they can't go all the way out to the really free ones, but they can go a little further in and a little further in, they can get to people like me. They can't get all the way into somebody like Maharaji, my guru, but I mean the old Maharaji, but they can get to somebody like me that's for sale in a way. See, I have a price. See, I mean, you hear what I'm saying? And but how much my price is will determine how pure the message is too.
How do you mean that?
Well, in other words, if I'm just on the make to become famous and powerful, they got me. And I'm just going to be there. Like, people say to me, I was invited to appear on, like, the Dick Cavett show or the Johnny Carson show. And I say, no, I won't do that. Because professional interviewers really turn me off because they're professionally interested in everything and nothing gets to them. And it's not a real conversation with a human being. Like, the nice thing about that Keith Berwick interview that I did was that Keith was really listening. He was really relating to me. And because he's a philosopher and he's interested in these areas, that's a different kind of an experience. If I were totally on the make, I would have jumped to do Johnny Carson. I mean, I could have become the big guru of the time just being on the Johnny Carson show. But it's not a clean situation for work. If I were pure and total, if I were Christ or Buddha, I could do the Johnny Carson show easily. Maybe I wouldn't, but